They don't look like me. That was the first thing Ruth Mitchell said when the nurse placed the first baby in her arms. Not, they're healthy, not how beautiful, not even, thank you, God. Just that, flat, cold, real. The nurse blinked. The delivery room went quiet. The baby squirmed gently against Ruth's chest, her tiny mouth gasping for air, looking for warmth. But Ruth America's sweetheart Runway, darling the face of Athena Lux, simply stared. Her hazel eyes painted with exhaustion and mascara streaks filled not with joy, but with something close to horror. A second baby cried, then the third. 3 identical crits. 3 identical baby girls, and none of them looked like her. Not her pale skin, not her straight golden hair, not her angular jawline or narrow nose or perfect symmetry, the kind agencies call genetically blessed. These babies had tight black curls, warm mocha-toned skin, eyes shaped like tiny moons. Beautiful in their own right, but not Ruth, not the brand, not the icon, not the girl who had spent the last 5 years surviving on 5 almonds a day and the illusion of perfection. Ruth didn't cry. She didn't ask to hold them again. She turned to the doctor and whispered, "Can I see the paperwork now?" 13 hours earlier, Ruth had entered the hospital under a false name. No PR rep, no family, no press release. Just a small suitcase, a prepaid debit card, and a pre-scheduled C-section booked through a private agency in Brooklyn Heights. She had told no one she was pregnant. Not her manager, not her mother, not even the man she believed at the time was the father. The truth was she wasn't sure anymore, and that scared her more than the blood, the pain, or the IV in her wrist. At 23, Ruth Mitchell had already lived 3 lifetimes. She was orphaned at 13, discovered at 15, a Victoria's Secret angel by 19. By 22, she had walked for Chanel, Burberry, and Balmain. She owned a penthouse in Manhattan, her face on 37 billboards worldwide. She had no time for scandal, no space for questions, and certainly no room for children, especially not these children. The social worker, a gentle black woman in her 40s named Camille, entered the recovery suite 6 hours later. Her tone was soft-practiced. "We're required to go over the release paperwork again with you present, Ms. Mitchell." "Call me Ava," Ruth said. That was the name she used on all medical forms now. Ava Strickland. She didn't even flinch. Camille sat across from her. Between them, the manila envelope. Inside, legal documents, state forms, and 3 unfiled birth certificates. "Would you like to see them again?" "No." The word came fast, too fast. Ruth looked down at her bandaged stomach. "I just want this done." Camille waited a moment. She had seen this before, young mothers in fear, in denial and shame. But Ruth didn't seem broken. She seemed blank, like someone following a script. "Do you understand," Camille said gently, "that by signing this, you are terminating all parental rights?" "Permanently?" Ruth nodded. Camille continued, "You will not have access to updates, photos, or visitation. You will not be allowed to contact them in the future, I know. And we must inform you, since the state has no record of paternal information. They may enter the foster care system before placement." That part cracked something in Ruth. Foster care. It sounded rough, messy, unpredictable. But she said nothing. Just took the pen. Her signature looked beautiful. The kind you'd see in a glossy campaign. Effortless. Perfect. Camille gathered the documents, gave her a moment, then stood. "If you change your mind within 72 hours, call this number," she said, sliding a card onto the bedside table. Ruth didn't even look at it. The hallway outside smelled like baby powder and bleach. Down the corridor, behind frosted glass, 3 bassinets sat quietly in the nursery. One of the nurses, unaware Ruth was watching, picked up one of the babies and sang softly, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Ruth felt a lump rise in her throat, but not from love, from nausea. She couldn't do it. Not because she did not want them, but because they would ruin her. What would people say? What would the tabloids write? Supermodel hides, secret black triplets. Who's the father inside Ruth Mitchell's hidden pregnancy scandal? Photos. Ruth's babies don't match. It would be career suicide. Worse, it would shatter the illusion. Ruth wasn't racist, at least not in the way people shouted about online, so she had black friends, posed with Naomi, kissed Kanye once at a party. She wasn't ignorant, But she understood the world she belonged to, the world of angles, filters, sameness. The world where difference wasn't beauty, it was risk. And those babies, they didn't look like a future cover of Elle. They looked like questions Ruth could never answer. That night, as the city lights glittered outside her hospital window, Ruth opened the manila envelope again. She had asked for only one thing to write the names. No one would know, but she would. She scribbled down 3 names, each chosen in secret: Angela, Andrea, Sophia, then folded the paper, tucked it into her wallet, and pressed it shut. She wouldn't keep photos, wouldn't memorize their birthdays. But a part of her, a piece buried so deep she couldn't name it, wanted them to at least have names. Names she gave them, names that meant something. Angela, Andrea, Sophia. One name for the part of her that was brave. One for the part that was lost. One for the part that might forgive her someday. By morning, Ruth was gone. The nurses said she left quietly without flowers or photos or a discharge hug. The babies were transferred to state custody the next day. They were given temporary numbers, new file codes, placed on a list. No one knew that their mother was on a flight to Paris, booking a new campaign, with Dior sipping espresso at Charles de Gaulle by sunrise. No one knew the names she had written. Not yet. Ruth arrived back at her Manhattan penthouse like she had just returned from a detox retreat, not from delivering 3 babies she would never see again. There were no signs of pain, no bandages, no flowers or congratulatory cards. Just her, tall, sharp, pristine, skin flawless, hair blown out and tucked neatly beneath a knit cashmere beanie. A pair of vintage Chanel sunglasses shielded the only vulnerable part of her eyes. The elevator opened directly into her apartment. The doorman didn't say a word. He didn't know. No one knew. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Inside, everything was as she left it: air-conditioned silence, faint rosewater scent diffusing through the walls. 3 unopened Vogue issues fanned out across the marble coffee table like trophies. No bottles, no cribs, no trace of what had happened. She dropped her overnight bag at the door and opened her laptop. By 10 a.m. the next morning, Ruth was seated at a long glass table in her agency's midtown office. Legs crossed expression, unreadable, surrounded by handlers. "You look better than expected," said Tori Levinson, her longtime manager. She said it with half a smile, half suspicion. "I had the flu," Ruth replied flatly. "I'm fine now." Flu. That was the story. That was the script. Tori didn't press. Not yet. She tapped her iPad. "So, Dior wants you in Paris. You'll shoot with Jean-Pierre for their winter campaign. The divine rebirth theme, you'll be the face of reinvention." The irony made Ruth's lips twitch. Rebirth. She had just ended 3 of them. "Also," Tori continued, "we got word from W Magazine. They want to do a full retrospective, a decade of Ruth Mitchell. We'll need baby photos, high school shots, that sort of thing." "No," Ruth said immediately. "Use editorial images only." Tori arched a brow. "That'll look controlled." "Good," Ruth snapped. "Control is the point." She spent the next 48 hours sleepwalking through fittings, call sheets, and skin prep treatments. She didn't flinch when her stylist touched her waist where her stitches still tugged. She didn't react when a junior intern asked if she'd lost weight again. She was a machine. A beautiful, efficient, emotionally vacant machine. Exactly what the industry demanded. Her inbox flooded with congratulations about her recovery and glow. Her publicist posted an airbrushed photo captioned, "Back. Better, Ruth Mitchell is rewriting elegance." It racked up 57,000 likes in under an hour. No one knew she had been sliced open, emotionally cauterized, and sewn back into the illusion. On the 3rd night, she sat alone on her balcony overlooking the skyline. Manhattan sparkled below like a promise she still couldn't decide whether to believe in. A voicemail blinked on her phone. It was her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in 5 months. "You disappeared again. I saw the Dior thing. You look sharp." "Ruth, don't forget who you were before all of this. You don't have to pretend with me." But Ruth did have to pretend, especially with her. Her mother had given birth to her at 17, a single white girl with no money, no diploma, and no direction. And she never let Ruth forget it. "Don't make the same mistakes I did," she had said when Ruth was 17 herself, on the verge of quitting school for Milan Fashion Week. "Don't end up stuck. Don't end up forgotten." Ruth didn't cry when she replayed the voicemail. She didn't feel warmth. only distance. She had done exactly what her mother hadn't. She walked away. She cut the cord. She chose herself. The morning of her flight, Ruth stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She peeled off the thin paper tape over her incision, examining the healing line. Just skin, flesh, memory. No meaning unless she gave it one. She had her assistant cancel all follow-up appointments. No therapy, no postnatal follow-ups, no complications. As far as the world was concerned, she had never been pregnant. She packed only black. At 4:30 p.m., Ruth left her building through the service entrance to avoid paparazzi. A private car waited on the curb. Inside, a garment bag containing the first look for Dior's campaign hung beside her. The driver didn't speak. Ruth liked that. As they crossed the Queensboro Bridge toward JFK, the city faded behind her like a photograph she didn't want developed. She thought briefly of the babies, of the nurse singing to them, of the soft paper bracelet she had slipped into her drawer and hadn't opened since. But she didn't reach for it. Instead, she rolled down the window slightly and let the February wind cut across her face. By the time they reached the tarmac, the sun was already bleeding into the Hudson River. The plane waited Dior's private jet, pristine and impersonal. As Ruth stepped onto the jetway, her phone buzzed. A message from Tori. Remember, Jean-Pierre wants raw beauty, no artifice, real reinvention. Ruth smirked. Reinvention? She had already done it. By disappearing. The slip of paper was no larger than a receipt. It lived inside a white envelope tucked deep into the lining of Ruth's leather travel wallet. Not hidden exactly, just not meant to be found. On it were 3 names, handwritten in her tight slanted script. Nothing else. Angela, Andrea, Sophia. She hadn't looked at them since the day she left the hospital. They had come to her fast like a memory that didn't belong to her. Names she never said aloud. Names she never whispered. She had given them without expectation, no promise, no bond. Just a parting thought scrawled with a borrowed pen. They were meant to be forgotten. The envelope moved with her. From New York to Paris, from Tokyo to Milan, from modeling bags to clutches to designer briefcases. It was always there somewhere in the background, like an expired passport or a hotel key she couldn't quite throw away. Every now and then it would fall out during security checks or check-in counters. She would see it. She would feel the shift in her stomach. But she never opened it, never read the names again. Instead, she'd slip it back like it was someone else's problem. One night, nearly a year later, Ruth sat in a hotel room in Berlin, staring out at the rain against the glass. The heater buzzed promptly. Room service remained untouched. She reached for her wallet to tip the concierge. The envelope slid out. Her fingers paused. Just long enough. She picked it up. It felt ordinary, paper thin, weightless. She considered tearing it, burning it, but instead she placed it in the drawer beside the Gideon Bible and closed it without a word. She told herself this wasn't guilt. It was practicality. What use were names to a woman who'd chosen silence? Ruth didn't cry when she thought of the girls. In fact, she barely thought of them at all. That's what she told herself. That was the lie that worked best. She had made her decision. She had moved on. She had campaigns to lead agencies to manage younger models to mentor. She had skin to tighten interviews to give, control to maintain. But sometimes when she passed a stroller in the street or saw sisters laughing in a commercial or heard a name that sounded too close to one, she had written she'd feel something freeze beneath the surface. Not pain, not regret, just cold. Ruth Mitchell had never looked better. At 41, she was still the face people remembered. Sharp cheekbones, impossibly clear skin, an elegance that hadn't aged so much as refined. Her image lingered on vintage perfume bottles and archived fashion spreads. She was no longer on the runways, but she didn't need to be. She had transcended the catwalk. Now Ruth taught others how to become unforgettable. 3 times a week, she held private sessions for elite modeling recruits, girls barely 20 limbs like reeds, voices half confident, half desperate. They idolized her. They hung on her critiques, craved her approval, mimicked her walk. Ruth corrected their posture, adjusted their eyes, told them how to hold still like they were being worshipped. And yet, every time one of them smiled with a mouth too perfect or walked with a sway too fluid, Ruth felt it, the chill of being edged out. It didn't show on her face. She was too disciplined for that. But deep inside, something whispered, "You're being replaced." Ruth, slowly, beautifully, quietly. She ignored it like she ignored most things that had the power to undo her. Her penthouse apartment in Tribeca was everything a woman of her stature should have: floor-to-ceiling glass cream interiors, minimalist elegance. Not a speck of clutter. Not a photo in sight. The walls were lined with art originals. A Basquiat, a muted Rothko. The kind of pieces that spoke sophistication, not sentiment. Even her bedroom felt like a showroom. Sleek, untouched. A space curated more for image than for living. She hosted rarely, slept alone, dined in silence. She told herself she liked it that way. Some nights, Ruth would light one of the expensive candles from Kyoto, pour herself a precise glass of Sauvignon Blanc, and scroll through old campaign reels on her iPad. Her face timeless, ethereal, glided across beaches in Morocco, balconies in Rome, snowy rooftops in Prague. Her voice and voiceover whispered things like power and grace and immortality. They felt like someone else's words now. She used to believe in the fantasy she sold. Now she simply maintained it. On a Wednesday morning in early spring, Ruth stopped by a boutique magazine stand in Soho, something she rarely did anymore. She was waiting for her driver. The sun was just beginning to warm the sidewalk, the city still groggy from winter. She glanced at the rows of glossies without much interest, until she saw them, 3 faces, identical, bold, radiant, framed on the cover of Verité magazine, New York's newest rising fashion publication. The headline read, "The Barrett Sisters' Triple Threat, Beauty, Brains, and Blood." Ruth froze. Angela, Andrea, Sophia. She didn't read the article. She didn't touch the magazine. She didn't blink. For a long moment, everything: the street noise, the morning light, the rush of the hallway fell away. Only those 3 faces remained. Time, like a wound long scabbed over, suddenly ached open. At first, Ruth thought it was a trick of the light. She leaned in casually, the way someone does when scanning covers without real interest. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the magazine rack, her eyes catching on the symmetry of a bold layout. 3 women, identical. 3 young women in rich jewel-toned silk suits, one in emerald, one in sapphire, one in ruby red. They stood side by side on the cover of Verité magazine, their faces turned slightly toward the lens, expressions fierce yet poised. And for a moment, Ruth couldn't breathe. Her chest didn't tighten. Her eyes didn't water. Instead, everything inside her body seemed to stall, like a machine suddenly deprived of power. Her thoughts didn't race. They just paused. Then slowly they began to turn. They had her nose. Not exactly, but close enough. The slope, the flare at the tip, the way it caught light from the left. Their eyes weren't hers, but the distance between them was familiar. The intensity behind them, the quiet calculation of people who had learned early how to hold back what they were really feeling. Their skin was darker, their hair curled tighter, their jaws stronger, but the shape of their lips, God, she had only seen those lips once. In a hospital room, 48 hours after surgery, when one of the nurses held a crying baby to her chest and Ruth had flinched. She hadn't wanted to remember. She had done everything not to. But there they were, grown, whole, gorgeous, and undeniably real. The cover headline sliced through the silence in her mind: "The Barrett Sisters' Triple Threat, Beauty, Brains, and Blood." The article blurbs beneath it blurred together. Adopted by postal worker turned single father Will Barrett. Sisters defy fashion norms with bold Afrocentric fusion. From foster care to front row at Fashion Week. It was too much, too fast. The names were printed right there in glossy font: Angela Barrett, Andrea Barrett, Sophia Barrett. Her names, the names she had written, the names she never said aloud. Ruth took a step back. The sidewalk tilted. The spring sun suddenly felt too bright, too sharp, like a spotlight aimed directly at her. Her heart thudded, not from awe, but from the cruel, creeping dread that comes when something you buried deep begins to claw its way back to the surface. This wasn't guilt. This was recognition. Recognition of faces that had no business existing outside her memory. Recognition of the truth that no matter how far she'd run, how many contracts she'd signed, how many cities she'd vanished into the past had found her. She didn't buy the magazine. She couldn't. Her hands were trembling. Instead, Ruth turned walked 2 blocks without direction and slipped into the back seat of her waiting car. She didn't speak the entire ride home. She just stared out the tinted window, her reflection caught in the glass, haunted by 3 younger versions of herself, each staring back through the pages like they'd been waiting for her all along. Ruth waited until nightfall. She made herself dinner, half an avocado and 2 boiled eggs she barely touched. She poured a glass of wine but didn't drink it. She turned on the lights in every room as if brightness could shield her from what she was about to do. Then in the quiet of her office, behind a locked door inside a minimalist white room that had never held a photo frame, she opened her laptop and typed Barrett Sisters Model NYC. The results loaded instantly. Photos, videos, press interviews, Fashion Week appearances, feature articles, a TEDx talk, a Harper's Bazaar shoot, a scholarship fund, a book deal. Her fingers hovered, then clicked. The first image was of them laughing carefree and radiant on a rooftop in Brooklyn. One held a smoothie, another had a guitar. The third wore headphones too big for her face. They looked like women who had grown up together. Not just in proximity, but in bond. They looked happy. Ruth's breath caught, not because they had succeeded, but because they had done it without her. Click, a YouTube clip loaded. A short documentary from foster to fame, the Barrett sisters' rise. The opening line, born under uncertain circumstances and placed into the New York State foster care system, Angela, Andrea, and Sophia Barrett were adopted at 5 months old by Will Barrett, a single father with no fashion experience and a heart big enough for 3. Ruth hit pause. 5 months. They hadn't been adopted immediately. She imagined them in those first weeks passed between strangers. Cribs that weren't warm. Voices that weren't gentle. Bottles given by hands that didn't know how to soothe. Her jaw clenched. You had 72 hours, she thought. You could have called. But she hadn't. She had signed. She had vanished. She had been so sure that cutting clean was the best way to preserve the life she had built. But now, watching their childhood unfold in digital snapshots, the life she saved had come at the cost of theirs. She scrolled through interviews. Dad taught us to be a unit, Angela had said. We don't compete. We elevate each other. We have different styles, different voices, Sophia added, but our bond is unshakable. It's weird not knowing where we came from, Andrea had once admitted in a podcast, but we chose to focus on where we're going. Ruth closed her laptop, not because she was done, but because she was unraveling. Her hands were cold, her neck was damp. Her mind kept pulling between 2 worlds, the woman who had given them life, the woman who had walked away from it. She walked to her mirror, looked at herself, still beautiful, still powerful, still Ruth Mitchell. But behind her reflection, something else stared back. Not shame, not self-hatred, just a question. What would they say if they knew? Would they want to know? Would they hate her? Would they already do? The wine glass on the desk remained untouched. Ruth picked it up, thought about drinking, then poured it down the sink. She wasn't ready to forget. Not anymore. Ruth had imagined someone different, a polished philanthropist, a celebrity stylist, a man with money connections, someone like her. But Will Barrett wasn't any of those things. He was a retired postal worker from Flatbush, a widower. No biological children, no private school pedigree, no trust fund, just a warm face, a lopsided smile, and the kind of presence you didn't notice in a crowd, but one that filled a room when he laughed. His name came up during a late-night search. Ruth had typed, "Who raised the Barrett sisters?" The article was from a small local blog. It had one photo, grainy but intimate. Will mid-laugh arms around 3 tiny girls in overalls and paint-splattered sneakers. They were holding brushes standing in front of a crooked wooden birdhouse. The caption read, "Will Barrett, known in the neighborhood for adopting triplets and coaching youth basketball, pictured during Sunday Craft Day in Prospect Park." Ruth stared at the photo for a long time. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't rich. He wasn't her. And yet somehow he had given them what she hadn't even tried to offer. She dug deeper. There were no PR headlines, no Instagram fan pages, but community boards, local interviews, and nonprofit newsletters painted a portrait she couldn't look away from. Will Barrett had taken in 3 infants as a single Black man, barely 35 at the time, against social pressure, against statistics, against what the system had expected. He'd learned how to braid their hair, attended every school recital, built a bunk bed from scratch, worked overtime to buy each girl a prom dress they chose themselves. Ruth clenched her jaw. It wasn't just admiration she felt. It was envy, pure acidic and unexpected. He got to be there. She clicked on a video clip embedded in a blog post, A Day in the Life, Barrett Family Tribute. It opened with home footage, grainy, slightly shaky, but filled with motion. Will was in the kitchen, dancing badly to Earth, Wind, and Fire, while the girls, maybe age 10, cracked eggs into a bowl and shouted about whose turn it was to stir. Later, bike riding down a cul-de-sac, falling asleep on the couch during a Disney movie. Birthday candles, spilled frosting, matching pajamas. The kind of chaos that only feels safe when you know someone's always there to clean it up. At the end of the video, the camera panned to Will seated on the porch, two girls curled under each arm, the third resting her head on his knee. He smiled at the camera and said, "They saved me more than I saved them. I just show up. Every day. That's what love is." Ruth didn't cry. She wouldn't let herself. But something inside her moved a small, imperceptible shift. The tiniest crack in the concrete. She had run from motherhood because she feared she couldn't show up, couldn't give herself without disappearing. And here was a man who had done it with no spotlight, no modeling contracts, no applause, just three girls who called him dad. She closed the laptop. The screen went dark. Her reflection stared back. Perfect, controlled, alone. In the quiet of her penthouse, Ruth whispered something for the first time in 17 years. "I don't know them." Then softer. "But he does," and just before she stood to leave, she replayed the final seconds of the video. Will Barrett porch light glowing behind him, wrapped in the messy comfort of fatherhood. The three girls smiling, laughing, in a family video that had no space for her. The venue was an old opera house turned event space in Midtown. Glass chandeliers, gilded balconies, and a blood-red carpet rolled across the marble entrance like a throne runner. It was the kind of night Ruth used to command, but tonight she was invisible. She arrived alone under a false RSVP name. No press, no entourage, no flashes. Her dress, a black velvet column, high-necked and almost too modest, was the opposite of what she'd once wear. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to see. The Celestial Cosmetics Gala was the pinnacle of spring's fashion calendar. Sponsored by the brand Ruth had once fronted in her 20s, it now catered to a younger generation. Bold, diverse, unapologetic. The ballroom pulsed with music low bass that thudded through heels and spines. Projectors cascaded galaxies across the arched ceilings. Waiters passed trays of champagne like starlight. And in the center of it all stood them. Yilalu in silver. Andrea was in white. Sophia in deep crimson. Three women orbiting one another effortlessly like celestial bodies locked in an unbreakable gravitational pull. They didn't pose. They existed. Together. Magnetic. Ruth stood at the edge of the room, swallowed by shadow and light. She had rehearsed this moment 100 ways in her head, but nothing had prepared her for the force of seeing them again, not as memories or screens, but flesh and motion and breath. They were real, undeniably real, and older now, almost 20. Women. The crowd parted briefly. Someone snapped a photo. Laughter rang out. That's when it happened. Angela turned. Her eyes skimmed the room casually until they landed on Ruth, and for one terrifying second time faltered. Angela's smile faltered too, just slightly. A flash of confusion, recognition, or something more primal, deeper than words. Then Andrea followed her sister's gaze. Then Sophia. 3 pairs of eyes. On Ruth. A second passed, maybe 2. But to Ruth, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, gravity-suspended lungs clamped, heart wide open. She didn't smile, didn't run, just stood there like a ghost returning to the house she'd built and abandoned. Sophia tilted her head, just slightly. Andrea's lips parted as if trying to place her. Angela narrowed her eyes, not in suspicion, but curiosity. She took a half step forward. The crowd swelled around them again. Photographers, fans, flashes. The spell broke. The Barrett sisters were swept away by handlers and stylists. Ruth stood frozen, a statue wrapped in velvet, unsure if what just happened was real. Had they known, could they feel it, that impossible aching recognition that lives in the bones, older than logic, older than memory? She reached for a champagne glass from a passing tray. Her hand shook. She didn't drink it. The music roared louder. Spotlights chased models down the mirrored runway. Names echoed from loudspeakers, honoring legacy celebrating icons. Ruth didn't hear them. Her past had just looked her in the eye, and now it was walking toward the future without her. The room was small, just 4 chairs, a glass table, and 1 floor lamp casting a halo of warm light. It smelled like fresh flowers and faint perfume. The kind of room designed for post-event press meetings or whispered brand deals. Not for this, not for confessions. Ruth sat first. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the door. It opened. Angela entered first, then Andrea, then Sophia. They didn't speak right away. They stood close to one another like they always did. Protective, united. The door clicked shut behind them. Angela's voice was the first to break the silence. "You were at the gala." Ruth nodded. Slowly. "Yes," Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Why another pause?" Ruth looked at them not as models, not as the polished women they'd become, but as echoes of something she'd once carried and let go. She swallowed hard. "Because I had to see you." Andrea tilted her head. Her tone was quieter, almost cautious. "Have we met before?" Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. This was the moment, the irreversible shift. No going back. "No," she said softly. "But you've met me." Angela's brow furrowed. What, her voice barely above a whisper, Ruth said, "I am your mother." Time collapsed. For a moment, no one moved. Even the air seemed to thicken. The hum of the building outside disappeared. Sophia took a sharp step back, her heels clicking like a slap. "No," she said. "No, you're not." Andrea's eyes widened, face pale. "You're Ruth Mitchell." Angela stared straight at her, unblinking. "You left us." No one asked how she knew. They knew. It was in the eyes, the mouths, the unmistakable ache that had chased them since childhood. The question that had haunted them in every mirror, every closed file, every foster care form: who would leave all 3 of us? And now the answer stood in front of them in designer heels and flawless skin, with eyes full of something too heavy to name. Sophia's voice cut first. Why the hell did you leave 3 babies?" Ruth opened her mouth, but Sophia raised a hand. "No, don't explain. Just say it." So she did. "Because I was afraid," Angela scoffed, bitter. "Afraid of us. Afraid of what I would become. Afraid I couldn't give you what you deserved." Andrea's voice cracked. "And you thought disappearing was better." I thought. Ruth stopped herself. The instinct to justify rose up, but she strangled it. "I made a decision. A terrible one. But it was mine, and I won't dress it up." Sophia folded her arms, trembling with fury. "You saw our names. You knew where we were. You stayed away." "Yes." Angela stepped closer. Her voice shook, but her stare did not. "Do you even remember our names?" Ruth nodded, her voice barely a breath. "Angela, Andrea, Sophia." That somehow was worse. Andrea turned away, hands to her face. Sophia blinked hard, fighting tears. Angela stayed still. Her voice, when it returned, was low. "We spent our whole lives wondering if we weren't good enough for a mother to stay." No response came. What could Ruth sat in the weight of her silence, of their pain, not trying to fix it, not reaching out, just sitting in it, letting it be real, letting it hurt. Finally, Andrea turned around. "We don't want answers, not tonight." Sophia nodded, voice strained. "We just wanted to see the face." Angela exhaled sharply, then asked, "One thing, before we go." She stepped forward, eyes locked on Ruth's. "When you signed in the papers, did you name us?" Ruth's lips trembled. "Yes," Andrea swallowed. Which names? Ruth closed her eyes. Then quietly, Angela, Andrea, Sophia. All 3 girls went still. Then without another word, they turned and left together. Not rushing, not slamming doors, just walking away from a truth they never asked for. And Ruth, she stayed in the room, alone, no longer running, but nowhere near forgiven. They met in a neutral place. A small coffee house in the Lower East Side, half hipster, half forgotten. No PR handlers, no makeup, no flashing bulbs. Just four people and the low hum of conversation that never quite reached them. The table was round, wooden, unsteady on one leg. Angela, Andrea, and Sophia sat together on one side, unspoken order, unbreakable rhythm. Ruth sat opposite them, alone again. The silence between them wasn't angry. It wasn't warm either. It just existed. Andrea stirred her tea twice before speaking. This isn't about forgiveness, Sophia added, and it's not about answers either. Not all of them, Angela leaned forward. But we need to know something that matters. She paused. Did you name us? Ruth blinked, her hand clenched beneath the table where they couldn't see it. She had expected this, or something like it. Still, the question cut deeper than she thought it would. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she knew it too well. She nodded slowly. Yes, Andrea's fingers stopped moving. The spoon clinked against the cup. Sophia's lips parted, just slightly. Angela asked, steady but soft, what were the names? Ruth didn't hesitate. She had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times. And still when she spoke, her voice nearly broke. Angela, Andrea, Sophia. The air went still. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the cafe's background music faded, just a distant piano trill. A dish clattered in the back kitchen. Outside, a siren wailed 2 blocks away. Life went on. But at this table, time had stopped. Angela blinked once slowly, then looked at her sisters. Andrea looked down at her hands as if seeing them differently now. Sophia said nothing, but her shoulders shifted just slightly, as though letting go of a weight she didn't know she was carrying. Ruth didn't push, didn't explain why she had named them, didn't talk about the envelope, or the years of silence, or the way their names had lived like ghosts in her purse. She just sat, and for once, so did they. No accusations, no unraveling. Just that moment, one tiny bridge between what was and what could have been. As they stood to leave, Sophia was the last to rise. She looked back at Ruth, not with forgiveness. Not yet, but something softer, something unspoken. Not quite acceptance, not quite rejection. Just a flicker of maybe. The taxi dropped her at the curb just before dusk. Manhattan glowed gold and blue behind her, but Ruth didn't look back. She walked slowly, heels clicking against stone, each step echoing louder than it should have. Her penthouse hadn't changed, neither had the view. But inside her, something had shifted. No panic, no collapse, just a stillness. Like the moment after a wave has crashed, when the sea hasn't yet decided what it wants to become. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, legs folded beneath her, a wool throw draped over her shoulders. The skyline blinked with artificial stars. Below, lives flickered on and off, people eating, arguing, laughing, forgetting. She watched the city like a stranger. For years, Ruth had measured life in magazine covers, campaigns, contracts. Even her memories came in stylized flashes, editorial moments, and perfect lighting. But now, her mind was quieter. Empty in the way that comes only after truth. Sometime before dawn, she rose. She didn't reach for her laptop or phone. She walked to her old desk, carved wood never used, and opened the drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside, 3 envelopes, 3 blank sheets of heavy linen paper. 1 pen. She didn't plan what to write. She simply began. To Angela, the one who looked me straight in the eye. You are strength, not the loud kind, the kind that stands still when the room trembles. I saw it in you when you didn't flinch, even as I admitted the worst version of myself. I named you Angela because it meant messenger. Maybe part of me hoped you'd carry something forward, even if I couldn't. I don't deserve your gaze. But thank you for not looking away, love, Ruth. To Andrea, the one who asked gently and still wounded me with truth. You were the first to break, the first to turn away. That hurt in you, I caused that. I wish I could unsign the paper. But wishes don't stitch the past. Still, if my words can offer clarity, not comfort, I will write them all. I named you Andrea because it meant courage. I see now how cruel that might have been, asking a baby to carry that weight. Love, Ruth. To Sophia, the one who didn't speak but whose silence said everything. You scared me most, not because you were angry, but because your eyes asked a question I couldn't answer. Why did you not even try? The truth is, I didn't trust myself to love without breaking. That doesn't make it right. It just makes it real. I named you Sophia for wisdom. And maybe that too was projection. Hoping you'd understand what I never could. Love, Ruth. She folded each letter with care. No perfume, no embellishment, just truth on paper. She didn't know if she'd send them, but for the first time in years, she had spoken without a camera, a contract, or a mask. She had written not as Ruth Mitchell, the legend, but as Ruth, the woman who had lost something before she ever learned how to hold it. Outside, the sky was pale pink. A quiet morning, the kind you don't deserve but receive anyway. It was a Sunday morning in January. The city was quiet, blanketed in a soft hush of snow. Even Manhattan, normally defiant against seasons, seemed to exhale. Frost clung to railings. Breath rose like smoke from rooftops. Ruth stood barefoot in her kitchen nursing a black coffee. No cream, no sugar. The window beside her showed a world blurred in white and gray. She had grown used to silence these past few months. Not the lonely kind, the intentional kind, the kind where nothing demanded to be said. Then a knock. 3 firm raps against her door. Not hesitant, not angry, just certain. Ruth didn't move right away. She rarely had visitors, and she never expected them. She walked to the door slowly, heart already racing, though she didn't know why. When she opened it, the cold rushed in, and with it them, Angela, Andrea, Sophia, standing together. No coats, no makeup, no entourage, just winter wind at their backs and the kind of quiet you feel more than hear. No one smiled, no one cried. Sophia spoke first. We need to talk. They didn't wait for permission. They stepped inside like they'd done it before 3 synchronized pulses of presence. Ruth stepped back automatically, letting the door click shut behind them. The apartment felt warmer, fuller, but not comfortable. Not yet. She led them to the living room. No one sat. Angela looked around, scanning the space. Andrea rubbed her hands together as if trying to chase warmth or nerves. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Then Angela said simply, "We read the letters." Ruth's mouth opened slightly but closed again. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. Andrea glanced at Sophia, then back at Ruth. "We're not here to forgive you. Not today," Sophia added flatly. "We're here to decide what comes next." The silence that followed wasn't heavy with anger anymore. It was something else. A threshold, a narrow, uncertain space between never and maybe. Ruth didn't move. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. And for the first time, all 4 of them stood in the same room, not as strangers, not yet as family, but as people with a story unfinished. They sat facing each other at Ruth's long walnut table. Coffee cups sat untouched between them. The steam had faded. The warmth, too. Angela took the lead as always. Her tone was measured but not soft. "We're not doing this the way you might think." Ruth nodded once. She said nothing. Andrea leaned forward, fingers laced tightly together. No public statements, no reunions, no media, no "we found our mother" article in People magazine. Sophia cut in sharply. No cameras, no interviews, no redemption arc. Ruth's eyes flicked to her, but she remained still. Angela's gaze held Ruth's like a scalpel. "This stays private, between us. If you want to explore anything with us, it happens on our terms. You don't get to shape the narrative anymore." Ruth swallowed, but again no protest. Andrea hesitated, then added, "You don't get to be mom. That title belongs to someone who showed up every day, through everything." Sophia's voice was colder. "We're not looking for a mother. We're not here to give you comfort. This is about understanding, not restoration." There was a long pause. Ruth finally spoke. Her voice was quiet. "Low, I understand." Angela wasn't finished. "We might want to know things. We might want to ask questions. That's our decision. You don't initiate, you don't expect." Andrea added, "You answer what we ask honestly, not what you think we need to hear." Sophia, "You listen more than you speak." Ruth's hands were folded in her lap, not clenched, not trembling, just still. She nodded. Once, then again. "Okay," she said. Angela narrowed her eyes. "That's it, yes. No explanation, no pushback." Ruth met her gaze, not pleading, not performing. "You've spent your lives being told who you were by strangers, by headlines, by silence. I won't do that again. You've earned the right to decide." Something subtle shifted. Not approval, not affection, but the tiniest recognition that maybe she had heard them. Truly, The girls didn't relax, but neither did they leave. Instead, Andrea finally took a sip of her cold coffee. Sophia looked out the window. Angela exhaled slowly. They hadn't come to forgive. They'd come to draw lines in the sand, and Ruth, for the first time, didn't try to erase them. She simply let them stand. It was a cold Tuesday when they returned. No announcement, no message before. Just a knock lighter this time. Ruth opened the door to find the three of them standing there, coats zipped, cheeks pink from the wind. Angela held a box in her arms. Plain, cardboard, worn at the edges, the kind of box that had lived through years of closets, moves, basements. The kind that mattered even if it never said so out loud. They stepped in silently. Ruth didn't ask. She simply moved aside. No coffee today, no prepared seating. They walked to the living room on their own, sat cross-legged on the floor like girls again, and placed the box between them. Angela opened it. Inside, a small mess of moments. Photographs, cloth toys with faded patterns, 3 identical hospital bracelets, a pacifier still tinted soft pink, 1 baby sock with a tiny embroidered star. No one said whose was whose. They didn't need to. Ruth sat opposite them, breath shallow. Her fingers hovered, then slowly reached into the box, hesitant, reverent. She picked up a photo, not a printed one, but a Polaroid. 3 swaddled newborns in a hospital bassinet, side by side, red-faced and wrinkled and alive. No names, no mother in frame. She blinked and the room tilted slightly. Not from shock, but memory. Buried deep now, unearthed. The sound of 1 baby crying. Then 2. Then 3. The nurse's gloved hands. The cold pen she used to sign. The silence afterward. Her thumb brushed the corner of the photo. It trembled. Andrea pulled out a second item, a plush rabbit with one ear sewn back on in mismatched thread. I used to call this one Mooney. I didn't sleep without it for years. Sophia picked up a hospital bracelet, read the faded label aloud. Infant A, female, 5 albs, 2 OZ. Angela passed Ruth a folded piece of paper. Inside, a photocopy of the intake report, names listed as to be determined. They didn't keep your names, she said. Ruth nodded, unable to speak. She picked up the sock last. The tiny star. She had bought those herself, she realized. A week before delivery, just in case she changed her mind. She hadn't. But now, sitting on the floor, surrounded by the echoes of choices she couldn't undo, she felt the weight of all the almosts. Almost kept, almost stayed, almost tried. Sophia spoke quietly. Will kept this box. He didn't talk about you. But he kept it safe, Andrea added. We only opened it a few years ago. We weren't ready before. Angela looked at Ruth. We're not sure we're ready now, but we didn't want to carry it alone anymore. Ruth looked down at her hands. One still held the sock. She didn't cry, but inside something gave. A splinter, a breath, a thaw. Outside, the snow had started again. Soft, quiet, no conclusions. Just a room, a box, and 4 women sitting in a circle. Not fixed, not healed. But maybe beginning. They didn't sit at the table this time. They stayed on the floor where the baby box had been. No props, no tea, no soft lighting to dilute the weight of what was coming. Angela broke the silence. Why did you leave? Her voice wasn't angry, not sharp, just precise, a scalpel, not a hammer. Ruth didn't look away, because I was 23, alone, frightened, and selfish. Andrea frowned. Selfish how I thought motherhood would destroy me, and I wasn't brave enough to find out if that was true. Sophia leaned back against the couch. You didn't even try. Ruth nodded. No, I didn't. Angela's arms were crossed. You had money, access, options. I had fear, Ruth said, and pride. I was more afraid of becoming invisible than I was of losing you. That's the truth. Andrea looked down. We weren't invisible. No, Ruth said quietly. You were unforgettable. Sophia's tone turned colder. So, did you ever think about us? Ruth took a breath, then exhaled slowly. Yes, every birthday, every Runways show I walked, every time I saw a little girl with 3 braids instead of 1. Angela challenged her. Then why not reach out? Because I signed away that right, and I believed I convinced myself that it would be more damaging to come back than to stay gone. Andrea's eyes were glassy, and the regret Ruth didn't blink. Yes, I regret it, Sophia pressed. Since when Ruth's voice was soft now, but without fragility. Since the second I walked out of that hospital. Since the moment the pen left the paper. Angela asked, why didn't you fight for us even later? Because I thought I had forfeited the fight. And I didn't believe I could do it without turning you into a headline. I wanted the world to forget what I had done, even if I couldn't. They sat with that for a long moment. No one filled the space with comfort or deflection. Andrea finally asked, what would you have done differently? Ruth paused. She didn't romanticize. She didn't paint herself as the mother she wasn't. I would have stayed, even scared, even selfish. I would have stayed. Sophia's voice was quieter now, and now Ruth met her eyes. Now, I will follow your lead. Whatever that looks like. Angela looked at her for a long time, then said, that's the first real thing you've said to us. Outside, a siren passed. Life moved. Inside, there was nothing dramatic. No tears, no swelling music. Just four women in a room where questions had finally been asked and answers had been given without armor. Not healed, but honest. It was Sophia who spoke first. The room had fallen into one of its familiar silences, not awkward, but dense like fog that asked to be walked through, not pushed away. She was sitting in the same chair she always picked by the window, one leg folded under the other, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug Ruth had never replaced. I've been in therapy since I was 15, she said, not looking at anyone in particular. Off and on, mostly on. Angela and Andrea glanced at her. Ruth stayed still. I remember one session, Sophia continued. I was maybe 17. I asked my therapist when I'd finally forgive you. A pause, and she said, why would that be the end? Forgiveness isn't a destination. Understanding is. Ruth looked down, not ashamed, not startled, just deeply present. Sophia went on, that line stuck with me. For years, I thought healing meant forgiveness, letting go, moving on. But sometimes the goal isn't to let go, it's just to look at the thing fully, without looking away, without making it smaller or prettier than it was. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. So I wrote you something. She stood across the room and handed it to Ruth. No ceremony, no performance. You don't have to read it now. Ruth nodded, accepting it like it weighed more than paper ever could. Sophia sat back down, no tears in her eyes, just a quiet clarity that had taken years to shape. Andrea whispered, you okay? Sophia half smiled. I don't know, but I'm clearer. That's something. Later, after they'd left, Ruth sat alone on the floor. She opened the envelope slowly as if it might bite. Inside, a handwritten note. Not long. Ruth, I'm not ready to call you anything else. You weren't there. That's true. That matters. But I'm learning that grief can be layered. It's not just sadness. It's curiosity, anger, wonder, loss for what never was. I don't forgive you, but I see you now, and maybe that's a start, Sophia. Ruth folded the note back with trembling fingers. She didn't cry, but she felt something shift in her ribs, a loosening, a recognition. Not of forgiveness, not of family, but of truth. And for the first time, it felt like enough. They didn't speak much after the last visit. No group texts, no late-night phone calls dissecting every word Ruth had said. Each of them carried the moment differently, like a stone in a coat pocket, not heavy enough to stop you, but always there. Angela took to journaling. Andrea took long walks. Sophia went back to therapy. But one thing was clear, they were thinking, not about forgiveness, not even about reconciliation, but about next steps. Angela was the first to say it out loud. If we're going to do this, we have to do it our way. They met in Andrea's apartment, barefoot on the rug, teacups half full. What does this even mean, Andrea asked. It means not letting her shape the relationship, Angela replied. It means deciding the shape ourselves, Sophia added. And it means understanding that we don't owe her anything, but that doesn't mean we owe ourselves nothing. That line hung in the air a while. They began writing ideas on a notepad. Not a plan, actually more like a list of possibilities. Soft things, things without pressure. One letter a month, one dinner in public with no expectations, one question each per meeting, no contact in between unless agreed upon. Boundaries, time, breathing room. The framework wasn't for Ruth, it was for them. Andrea said something that shifted the conversation. I don't think I want a mother, but I think I might want to know the woman who named me. Sophia nodded. Angela added, and I want to know if I can sit with her without flinching. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic decisions, just a slow, shared willingness to try mine. A week later, they wrote Ruth an email. Short, careful, subject what comes next. Ruth, we've talked, we've thought. We're not making promises. We're not starting over. But we are continuing. Starting next month, we'd like to meet once somewhere neutral, just to talk. 1 hour, one rule, no past unless we ask. If you are still open to that, we'll let you know where. That's all for now, AA and S. Ruth didn't respond immediately, but when she did, the message was only 4 words long, I will be there. That wasn't a reunion. It wasn't healing. It was something quieter. More American in spirit earned connection through honest distance. A relationship built like scaffolding, slow measured subject to change. They didn't call it family, but they stopped calling it nothing. And sometimes that was more than enough. It was tucked between the pages of an old-fashioned lookbook, Spring Collection 2006. The book had been unopened for years. It still smelled faintly of cologne and dust, the gloss of its pages softened by time. Ruth had been clearing shelves not for nostalgia, but to make space literally and figuratively. She flipped through the spreads, absently glitter gowns, ghost versions of herself posing in cities she barely remembered. And then, the paper slipped out. A faded yellow post-it edges curled ink nearly dissolved in places. 3 words, Angela Andrea Sophia. Written in her own handwriting, rushed crooked scrawled while sitting in a dim recovery room after labor. It had been all she allowed herself to keep. Ruth stared at it. No music swelled, no visions. Just a quiet drop in her chest, the sound of remembering what you were never brave enough to carry. She held it in her palm like a leaf from a season she had tried to burn. She didn't cry by spy. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, walked to her closet, found a slim silver frame still wrapped in its store plastic. She had meant to use it for a photo once. She flattened the post-it, carefully smoothing the corners as best she could. No embellishment, no caption. She placed it in the frame. That afternoon, she hung it in her hallway, not in the bedroom, not hidden in a drawer. The hallway between her kitchen and the room she never used. It didn't announce itself. Most guests wouldn't even notice. But every time Ruth passed it on her way to make tea or write or water the lone plant she kept alive, she would see it. 3 names, not forgiven, not erased, just remembered. She didn't frame the post-it to fix the past. She framed it so it would never be forgotten again. They met by accident, or maybe not. Ruth couldn't tell. It was a rainy afternoon downtown, the kind that turned umbrellas into awkward shields and sidewalks into muted rivers. She had ducked into the small bookstore off Spring Street 1 she used to visit in her 20s when being unknown still felt like a promise. She wasn't expecting to see anyone. But when she turned down the nonfiction aisle there, she was Andrea, reading glasses, leather jacket, one hand tucked into her coat pocket, the other holding a book Ruth couldn't see. Andrea looked up. Their eyes met. The moment could have gone any number of ways. Andrea didn't flinch. Ruth didn't speak. For a beat, neither moved. The air between them buzzed, but not with anger. Not anymore. Then Andrea did something small, but seismic. She gave a nod. Just once, not warmth, not invitation. Just a quiet acknowledgement, I see you. Ruth returned it. No smile, no rush forward, just stillness. And in that moment, they were not mother and daughter, not enemies, not victims of a broken history. They were 2 people who had survived the same story from opposite sides. Andrea went back to her book. Ruth turned the corner, heart thudding but calm. They didn't speak. And yet somehow they'd said everything they needed to. The magazine had arrived in the mail by accident, or perhaps it hadn't. A glossy fashion issue Ruth didn't subscribe to anymore, but had once graced the cover of in another lifetime. She almost tossed it into the bin without a glance until she saw it. There they were, front and center, Angela and Andrea Sophia, the Barrett sisters, but this time not as a novelty, not as a miracle of resemblance or a tabloid curiosity. They were the headline. The future is now how the Barrett sisters are redefining power, style, and sisterhood. The photo was breathtaking, not in the way Ruth had once posed artful angles, curated perfection, but in something realer. Their hair undone by the wind, their eyes fierce and unflinching, each of them distinct but linked not just by blood but by fire. Ruth sat down slowly. She studied their faces one by one. Angela sharp, self-possessed, the leader. Andrea soulful, observant, the one who felt everything too deeply. Sophia stoic, precise, always 5 thoughts ahead of the world around her. She looked for herself in their eyes, their hands, their posture. But this time she didn't try to claim anything. She simply saw them. Not as daughters she never raised, not as ghosts of a life she forfeited, but as women who had written their own story, and in some quiet way had let her glimpse it. She rose from the chair and crossed the hallway. The post-it note was still in its frame, soft yellow ink nearly gone, but still legible. 3 names. She touched the glass lightly. "I didn't raise you," she whispered, "but I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand who you've become." There was no apology in her voice, no grief sharp enough to bleed, just truth, soft, still, enduring. Ruth placed the magazine gently beside the frame, not for vanity, not for display, but as a reminder of what could not be undone and what somehow could still be witnessed. She would never start over, but she would always remember, and remembering finally would be enough.